Hello, everyone. On a morning in March 1995, the people of Japan woke up early just like any other day. They left their homes heading to work, universities, and schools, following the same routine in one of the most organized and peaceful countries in the world. But on this specific day, March 20th, at exactly 7:47 a.m., the Japanese capital Tokyo was about to face a terrifying disaster. Commuters on the subway were riding as usual when suddenly, without warning, strange symptoms began to appear: coughing, dizziness, burning eyes, then chest pain, shortness of breath. Within moments, people started bleeding from their noses, collapsing, and suffering violent seizures. Even those who tried to help began to experience the same symptoms, and all of this was happening inside sealed subway cars, moving deep underground. But the real horror was that it wasn't just one train. This was happening on three major subway lines at the same time. It was as if a deadly plague had struck Tokyo's subway system all at once. Later, it became clear this was no accident. It was a silent declaration of war from a cult that believed they were above everyone else, willing to sacrifice anyone and anything to fulfill their twisted prophecy. Welcome to today's story, the deadliest cult in Japan's history, Aum Shinrikyo. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And let's see if we can hit 100 likes before the next video. In March 1955, a boy named Chisuo Matsumoto was born into a poor family that made traditional tatami mats. From the very beginning, his life was destined to be different from most children. Chisuo was born with glaucoma, a condition that damages the optic nerve. He was completely blind in his left eye, and his right eye had only partial vision. Because of this, at the age of 6, he was enrolled in a school for the blind. But instead of that school being a place of learning, it became the stage where Matsumoto revealed his true personality. He took advantage of the little vision he had and used it to dominate his blind classmates. He became a ruthless bully, beating them whenever he felt like it, taking their money in exchange for helping them with simple tasks. Yet, in front of teachers, he acted like a gentle, kind, and well-behaved child. After spending 20 years at that school, he graduated and applied to law school but was rejected. So he turned to study traditional Chinese medicine, specializing in acupuncture. Surprisingly, he became skilled at it, and the job fit well with his health condition. But deep down, Matsumoto had ambitions far greater than just being a healer. He was waiting for the right time to unleash them. Not long after his graduation, he tried to build a normal life. He got married and opened a small herbal medicine shop. That's when he discovered a new talent: salesmanship. He managed to earn hundreds of thousands of yen selling fake remedies and bogus herbal mixes, convincing people they were miracle cures. But in 1981, he was caught and arrested for practicing pharmacy without a license. He was fined 200,000 yen, a huge amount at the time. The incident shook his family and left him humiliated. Instead of taking responsibility, Matsumoto grew bitter. He felt betrayed by the state, believing it had robbed him of everything. That shame and anger fueled deep hatred for the system. And rather than correcting his mistakes, he turned away from reality. He immersed himself in Eastern philosophies, practiced yoga and meditation, and slowly began shaping a twisted worldview, mixing concepts of karma, reincarnation, and resurrection into his own personal philosophy. Once Matsumoto felt he had mastered every angle of his new path, he launched a fresh business venture: a yoga school and a publishing house. From that moment on, Chisuo Matsumoto, the failed medicine seller, was gone, and Shoko Asahara, the spiritual guru, was born. But just like before, he wasn't selling cures this time. He was selling people a ticket to paradise, at the cost of their very lives. Asahara used his new identity to merge his marketing skills with spirituality, building the image of a mystical teacher. One of his first publicity stunts was publishing a photo of himself in a yoga pose that made him appear to be levitating. Strangely enough, people believed it. The image caused a sensation, and Asahara leaned into the hype. He traveled abroad, took photos with religious leaders to gain credibility, appeared on television, radio, and in magazines, spinning wild stories to captivate followers. One of his most famous tales was claiming that a deity had appeared to him from the heavens and declared, "Asahara, you will become the god of light. You will establish the holy kingdom of Shambhala and lead the final war to rid the world of evil. With this narrative, he began to attract hundreds of followers, eventually naming his group Aum Shinrikyo, the Supreme Truth Cult. Then, in 1989, he achieved a milestone that gave him unprecedented power. The Japanese government officially recognized his group as a religious organization. This recognition granted him legal protection, tax exemptions, and made authorities hesitant to investigate him. Asahara was no longer just a strange yoga teacher. He was now the leader of a legally acknowledged religious sect. This opened the doors for him to expand his influence and recruit an army of loyal followers who would help him fulfill his hidden ambitions. But Asahara knew ideas alone couldn't build an empire. He needed brains and talent. So he deliberately targeted university students, especially from elite institutions. Soon he had assembled a team of chemists, physicists, doctors, programmers, and communication experts. Why would such brilliant minds fall for Asahara's bizarre teachings? At that time, Japan was experiencing an economic boom. Society was wealthy, but students at prestigious universities felt crushing pressure, academically and emotionally. Many were isolated, lost in a materialistic world that seemed empty and suffocating. To them, Asahara appeared as a savior, offering spiritual relief and a higher purpose. But what happens when a man with blind ambition, scientific minds, and a legal shield decides that his destiny is to destroy the world? Asahara promised his followers spiritual enlightenment, but at the same time he provided them with labs and workshops to practice his so-called sciences. These young recruits soon became the public face of the cult. He used them to promote bizarre and unrealistic ideas, running magazine ads that claimed he could give people supernatural powers like telepathy, telekinesis, levitation, or even invisibility. And of course, when ordinary people saw bright young men and women dressed in lab coats working in what looked like real scientific facilities, they thought, if these people are following him, maybe Asahara really does have something beyond human understanding. For him, this was a massive victory. But joining Aum Shinrikyo wasn't just a casual choice. It was a carefully designed process of brainwashing and identity erasure. New recruits were called samana, half inside the cult, half outside. They could still keep their old lives, but only temporarily. To become a full member, a sangha, they had to give up everything. Their families, their jobs, their money, even their names. All possessions had to be donated to the cult, and the initiation rituals were terrifying. New members were given heavy doses of LSD, then locked alone in tiny rooms for weeks until their willpower was completely broken. After that, they were forced into inhumane living conditions, hard labor without pay, sleeping only 3 hours a night, and enduring brutal training that included scalding hot water baths one day and freezing cold water the next. All of this was framed as purification, a way to cleanse bad karma. Over time, Aum Shinrikyo isolated itself from the outside world. The cult established its main compound near Mount Fuji, and that's when the dark side of Asahara's empire began to reveal itself. In September 1988, during one of their bizarre rituals, a young member began showing signs of seizures and neurological distress. To heal him, they plunged him into freezing water as part of a so-called karmic cleansing ritual. But things went wrong. The young man died. It may have started as an accident, but within the cult, his death was treated as nothing unusual. To avoid exposure, Asahara and his closest followers burned the body and dumped the ashes into a nearby lake. But there was a problem. The victim had a close friend in the cult who witnessed everything. Terrified and angry, he threatened to leave and report the crime to the police. For Asahara, this was unacceptable. So he escalated. He convinced his followers that anyone outside the cult, or anyone who betrayed it, was consumed by evil karma, and as enlightened beings, it was their duty to release these people from suffering by killing them. This twisted logic turned murder into an act of salvation. Soon after, 5 cult members, acting under Asahara's direct orders, locked the young man in a cell and strangled him to death. This was the moment when Aum Shinrikyo crossed the line, from a so-called spiritual movement into a deadly cult of violence. But Asahara's hunger for power was only just beginning. This was the first deliberate murder committed by Asahara and his followers. The moment when Aum Shinrikyo transformed from a strange religious sect into a full-fledged criminal organization that justified killing as a sacred duty. And the bigger the cult grew, the more attention it attracted. Some people began noticing that something was deeply wrong. One of them was a young lawyer named Tsutsumi Sakamoto. Sakamoto specialized in cases involving religious groups. He knew that Aum Shinrikyo was illegally detaining members and seizing their property. Determined to stop them, he began building a class action lawsuit. For months, he collected evidence, interviewed families of missing members, and prepared his case. Eventually, he even appeared on a television interview to expose the cult. But tragically, the broadcast never aired. Terrified of lawsuits, the TV station secretly handed a copy of the interview to Aum Shinrikyo's leadership. In one reckless move, the station had betrayed Sakamoto, delivering him and his family directly into the cult's hands. Asahara decided the lawyer couldn't be allowed to live. His execution was ordered, but this time, the punishment wouldn't happen inside the cult's compound. It would happen inside Sakamoto's own home. In the early hours of November 5, 1989, a team of Asahara's most loyal disciples broke into the Sakamoto residence in Yokohama. Armed with 14 syringes filled with potassium chloride, their original plan was to abduct him at the train station. But since it was a holiday, Sakamoto had stayed home with his family, so instead they brought the horror to his doorstep. At 3 a.m., they struck. Sakamoto was knocked unconscious and injected with the lethal poison. His wife received the same fate. And in the most horrifying act of all, their 14-month-old baby boy was also killed. Coldly, the killers placed the 3 bodies in steel drums, dumped them across different prefectures, and destroyed all evidence, burning bedsheets, tossing weapons into the ocean, even smashing the victim's teeth to make identification impossible. For 6 long years, the disappearance of the Sakamoto family remained an unsolved mystery, and although police suspected Aum Shinrikyo, there was no proof to tie the cult directly to the crime. This gave Asahara and his followers a terrifying sense of invincibility. Because behind Aum Shinrikyo's ability to commit such atrocities and escape punishment was power, and that power came from money and influence. Every full member had to surrender everything to the cult, their homes, cars, savings, even family inheritances. The cult used this wealth to build a massive commercial empire, running restaurants, real estate agencies, marriage bureaus, even entering Japan's booming computer industry. But they didn't stop there. Aum Shinrikyo expanded internationally, buying a large farm in Sri Lanka, a sheep station in Australia, and other assets worth hundreds of millions. At its peak, the cult's empire was valued at over $1 billion. With this fortune, they infiltrated nearly every sector of Japanese society, placing members in the police, the military, and key ministries like education and justice. They even had ties to corporate giants like Toshiba and Hitachi. But none of this money went toward temples or improving the lives of their followers. Instead, it funded research into weapons of mass destruction. They even established what they called a cosmic hospital, which in reality was a secret prison where dissenting members were tortured. By now, Asahara's arrogance had reached the level of madness. Surrounded by fanatical followers willing to do anything for him, he no longer saw himself as a man. He truly believed he was a god. And the apocalyptic war he once claimed would come? He was now convinced it was his destiny to start it. And soon, Tokyo would pay the price. The world was about to witness one of the most horrifying terrorist attacks of the 20th century. In spite of the judges running out of patience, what had just happened was considered a major success for the cult, proof that they now held a devastating weapon in their hands. After the Matsumoto operation, which they themselves called a triumph, Asahara's delusions of grandeur completely took over. He gave direct orders to the cult's chief chemist to produce 70 tons of sarin gas. The plan was to release that massive quantity over Tokyo and wipe the city off the map. But while the work was underway, a fatal mistake occurred. A leak in the lab released sarin into the air, spreading a foul stench throughout the area surrounding the compound. Slowly, residents began filing complaints about the strange odor. The police responded, collected soil samples, and the analysis revealed 2 chemical compounds directly linked to sarin production. At this point, the cult had no idea that the police were closing in. until the situation spun out of control. A major newspaper published a report about the mysterious smell coming from Aum Shinrikyo's headquarters. Panic spread among the leaders. Orders were immediately given to destroy all existing sarin stockpiles. Within weeks, they even built a fake wall inside the compound, decorated to look like a prayer hall to conceal the lab. Even with the hard evidence, authorities still hesitated to act, wary of the cult's religious status and political influence. But suspicion was firmly planted, and the downfall of Aum Shinrikyo became only a matter of time. The final nail in the coffin came from the cult's own recklessness. Members kidnapped a man whose sister had escaped the group. She had been a sex worker, and they wanted to kill her to silence her. But since her brother refused to betray her whereabouts, they imprisoned him, drugged him, and eventually killed him. Unfortunately for the cult, a witness saw the abduction, noted the license plate number, and reported it. Police traced the car back to a known member of Aum Shinrikyo. That single report, combined with the evidence already in police hands, gave them the justification they needed for a full-scale raid on all cult facilities. But Ashihara had deep moles inside law enforcement. When he learned the raids were planned within 2 days, he panicked. Convinced the end had come, he gave one final desperate order: launch a massive attack on the Tokyo subway system. The goal was to create chaos, paralyze the capital, and distract the authorities long enough for him to regroup. When the order was issued, the cult had only 36 hours to prepare the required amount of sarin. But there was one problem. After the botched leak and subsequent investigation, they had destroyed almost all of their stock. Suddenly, they were racing against time. After 36 sleepless hours, their chemists managed to produce only 10 liters of sarin. Because of the rush, the quality was poor, barely 50% pure, and the liquid was brown instead of transparent. Without time to build sophisticated dispersal devices like before, they resorted to a simpler method: plastic bags filled with just under a liter of sarin each, wrapped in newspaper. The plan was for attackers to carry the bags onto the subway and puncture them with sharpened umbrella tips. Before departure, the cult's doctor handed each attacker a syringe filled with atropine, the antidote to sarin, so that if anything went wrong, they might save themselves. And so, everything came down to execution. On the morning of Monday, March 20th, 1995, right in the middle of rush hour, 5 attack teams from Aum Shinrikyo set their plan in motion. Each team had 2 men, 1 attacker, and 1 driver. Their targets were 3 of Tokyo's busiest subway lines: the Chiyoda Line, the Marunouchi Line, and the Hibiya Line. These 3 lines all intersected at one single hub: Kasumigaseki Station, home to police headquarters and numerous government ministries. Striking there would paralyze the entire Japanese state. Each attacker boarded his designated subway car. As the trains neared their targets, they quietly pulled out plastic bags wrapped in newspaper from beneath their arms. With sharpened umbrella tips, they punctured the bags several times to release the sarin, and then slipped away unnoticed. At first, passengers didn't realize what had happened, but within minutes, one woman collapsed in agony, describing the pain as if she'd been shot. She began coughing violently, and when she looked around, she saw dozens of others convulsing, some bleeding from the nose, others collapsing to the floor. In just minutes, 5 subway cars turned into hell. On the Hibiya Line, one heroic passenger noticed the leaking bag and kicked it off the train at Kodomacho Station. But instead of containing the gas, it spread throughout the entire platform, poisoning even more people. On the Marunouchi Line, the disaster was even worse. The attacker hadn't punctured his bag properly, so the leak was slow. The train completed its route, returned, and kept running for 1 hour and 40 minutes before the sarin was discovered, spreading the poison the entire time. The scenes were nightmarish. People foaming at the mouth, vomiting, convulsing, screaming in terror. And anyone who tried to help the victims fell sick themselves. Within minutes, Tokyo's subway system was swarming with ambulances, police, and paramedics. By the time it was over, more than 7,000 people were injured. 13 were killed. Within an hour, the similarities between this attack and the Matsumoto incident a year earlier were obvious. The police quickly connected the dots, and just 2 days later, on March 22nd, 1995, Japan launched the largest police raid in its history. Thousands of officers stormed Aum Shinrikyo's headquarters, and over 100 related sites. Inside, they uncovered the hidden laboratory behind the Fike wall, along with tons of chemicals used to make sarin, massive stockpiles of explosives, and evidence of illegal weapons research. What followed was the largest manhunt in Japanese history. Hundreds of members were arrested, and in May, after 2 months of intense searching, police finally located Shoko Asahara himself, hiding inside a small room of one of the cult's compounds. With the cult's leader in custody, Japan began the longest trial in its history. For nearly 8 years, Asahara sat in court denying everything, claiming he was blind, mumbling incoherently, and eventually refusing to speak altogether. His lawyers argued he was insane, but the judges ruled otherwise. He wasn't insane. He was responsible. The verdict? 13 cult leaders, including Asahara, sentenced to death by hanging. The rest received life sentences. And on July 6, 2018, over 23 years later, the sentence was finally carried out. Shoko Asahara and 6 of his top aides were executed. The Tokyo subway sarin attack left a scar on Japan that will never fully heal. And it sent a chilling reminder to the entire world. A single twisted idea in the mind of one man can turn into a nightmare that destroys thousands of lives. And that's the end of today's story. What do you think? If you've got other cases you'd like me to cover, drop them in the comments. The one that gets the most love, I'll turn into a video. And don't forget, hit like, leave a comment, subscribe, and share this with someone who'd find it just as fascinating. See you in the next one with an even more gripping story. Peace.